Good morning, everyone. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone to turn off your cell phones, and if we could maintain as much silence as possible during the session itself, we'd appreciate it. Our session today is a book launch by Shabano Bilgrami, the book called Those Children. It's being moderated by Ms. Muniza Shamsi, who is a well-known writer, critic, and bibliographer. She's the author of Hybrid Tapestries, The Development of Pakistani Literature in English. She is a member of the International Advisory Board of the Journal of Postcolonial Writing, and she's also on the advisory committee of the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. I invite her to start the session.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Yes, it is on. Okay. Thank you very much. It's given me great pleasure to introduce Shabano Bilgrami. She is a poet, journalist, novelist, and children's writer. She was born in Islamabad, moved to Canada with her family when she was 3 years old. She spent her early childhood and adolescence in Montreal, moving back to Pakistan with her family in 1993. She received degrees from the University of London and King's College in 1998 and now lives in the United States with her family. She writes for several publications such as Herald, the Asian Review of Books, and she's features editor of Paper Cuts magazine. Her first novel, Without Dreams, which appeared in 2007, was longlisted for the inaugural Man Asia Literary Prize. It was a book, actually, that I really struck me. I thought it was a remarkable debut. And it looks at a very important issue in our society, which is silence as complicity, both public and personal. And she links up Pakistan's amnesia over the 1971 war with the story of a rich, beautiful woman in Karachi who is a battered wife. And at the heart of the story is the friendship of her son Harun and their Bengali servant boy, Abdul. The Good Children, which is a great pleasure for me to launch today, is a very different book. But it shares with her first novel a reference to the horrors of the 1971 war and portrays a friendship between two children, the narrator Farzana and her servant daughter Shahnaz. But basically, this is a novel which challenges and explores difference between faith, class, sect, and indeed cultures and continents. So through the story of a bereaved family, a father and 4 children, trying to cope with the loss of the mother, it's narrated by a 10-year-old American-born Farzana. And it revolves around her sense of dislocation and that of her siblings when their father decides to leave familiar America, where they have grown up, and take them back to Pakistan to live in an extended family. And the other really unusual aspect of this book, which I thought must have been very difficult to do, is the way she blends in the imaginary games these children play in a complete fantasy world of their own with the reality that they find and how they try to ferret out family secrets and things that nobody talks about. Now I'll ask Shabano to talk about her own book and tell you more.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Shamsi, for that generous introduction. Thank you too to Amina Syed and the organizers of the Karachi Literature Festival for giving me this amazing platform to launch my book. Thank you, family, friends, and well-wishers for coming today to support me. I see a lot of familiar faces, but more importantly, I see a lot of beloved faces, people whom I haven't met for many years, and I really am very grateful to you for coming today. I thought I would begin by briefly telling you what Those Children is about. When 10-year-old Farzana Mahmood and her 3 older siblings lose their mother to cancer, everything changes. Their father moves them from their familiar Chicago suburb to a city thousands of miles away in his native Pakistan. As the 4 of them adjust to life in Karachi and to the eccentricities of their extended clan, Farzana, Fatma, Raza, and Jamila escape into a fantasy world of their own making. As superhuman creatures with incredible powers, they investigate the members of their grandfather's household In the process, they discover astonishing facts not only about the Mahmoods, but also about the nature of family, love, and loss in the troubled yet beguiling city that is now their home. Farzana's love of sleuthing helps her to piece together her family's complicated history, a history that brings with it the promise of hope and redemption. Those Children is not about politics or current events. It is a story about the fundamental building blocks of society, family, and relationships. The story is told from the perspective of a 10-year-old American child whose view of adult relationships, politics, and Pakistan in general is heavily colored by her sometimes naive, sometimes unwittingly astute observations. The book is partly about loss and bereavement, but more importantly, it's about dealing with that loss through fantasy and play, through renewed relationships, and also through reconstituting one's roots and one's history. I thought I would read a few passages from the book. The first one is about Farzana's understanding of her own family's history. Noteworthy among Dadi's features was her voice, with its refined Urdu lilt. Characteristic, she never tired of reminding me of her genteel origins in a city steeped in culture called Lucknow. Now, she would sigh nostalgically, on the far side of the border in neighboring India. As I lay there, eyes half closed, waiting for her to speak, I looked forward to the faint musicality which made so much of her conversation, particularly on sleepy afternoons such as these, my lullaby. In a ludicrous pattern of association, perhaps to do with my English literalization of Lucknow as a place of luck, my mind jumped from her to a leprechaun, the famous television leprechaun of frosted cereals, his jaunty Irish accent, so I realized with a start, like Dadi's. When she finally spoke, however, it was in a monotone, wholly devoid of cadence, just about as musical as the cut, cut, cut of a door repeatedly falling back on its hinge. But where she lacked in expression, my imagination compensated, till eyes now fully closed, I saw the images of her narrative against my lids. I lay still, my lids closed against the sunshine, my lashes brushing the pale yellow of Dadi's starched chadar, through which, when I chose, I could look at her face, not as she was now, her features soft in their bed of loose flesh, but as she was in the photograph I found in the picture library, her pale round face regal in sepia, her hair swept up in bunches of white motia flowers, her sari aswirl with the vibrance of citrus. In the garden, in the barracks, the tropical mist of early mornings, the gnarled trunks of ancient trees with wide arms and their cluster of dusty foliage overhanging tin metal roofs and sandstone structures. Officers, their uniforms crisp, walking briskly down dusty tracks. Who knew where these images of a past I couldn't have known had come from? Was it from the hundreds of photographs I had surreptitiously looked through, the topsy-turvy early albums, their dark pages covered with tiny squares of black and white, some crooked, some unstuck from the dusty tape of decades ago? Flashes of a life lived, preserved, now over, that I had somehow internalized. The memories of my family, my memories, part of my consciousness too. Later, when I thought of the extraordinary affinity I felt to my grandmother's past, I realized that there was more to it, that with the gradual closeness I felt for her, my imaginative empathy with her history grew, till I could relate to her stories almost as much as if I had lived through them, just as I found myself, quite literally, walking into Amma and Baba's past. The second passage I'm going to read is a topic of particular fascination to Farzana, the 10-year-old protagonist, and that is the story of how her parents met. She imagines various scenarios, each more far-fetched than the next. Amma and Baba had met several years before they were grudgingly allowed to marry, or at least that is what we had been told. In 1977, Baba traveled with a group of friends from the coastal city of Karachi, northwards by train and by bus to Swat, where the mustachioed Imran, a fellow student, had his family home in Mingora. Imran, like Baba, was completing his BCom that year and planned to return to Swat to manage the Pine Cone Inn, a ramshackle guest house that his father owned in nearby Kalam. Presenting it as a reconnoitering expedition, a case study for his fellow classmates to solve, Imran persuaded his father to allow the 6 of them to spend a few weeks at the inn and use their recently acquired knowledge of business models to turn it into a profitable enterprise. Predictably, none of that happened. As soon as they reached Kalam and settled into the Pine Cone, a dusty sky blue 8-passenger minivan groaned its way up from Niadam, halted at the mountain view, and spewed out a botany professor, 6 female students, and a skinny-legged chaperone in churidar pajama universally known as Baji. The mountain view was across the Swat River and clearly visible from the upper windows of the Pine Cone. The day the minivan disgorged its passengers, Baba was on the roof of his friend's hotel, the flares of his bell-bottoms flapping in the cool mountain breeze as he smoked a hand-rolled cigarette and tried to imagine what life after graduation meant. A scholarship to the US, perhaps, which was what he wanted, or some settling in, as was Imran, to the humdrum of local small-time business. There was a commotion down below as the girls disembarked and immediately ran this way and that, oohing and eyeing at the contrast of jagged mountain and azure sky, the icy blue whiteness of the swiftly flowing river, the clusters of frail huts leaning against each other for support against the gusty wind. Baji shrieked in protest, her arms flailing like shafts of sugarcane as she called out to them in vain. Amused, Baba watched from above and across the river, while the girls scattered like a bunch of brightly colored marbles, his now forgotten cigarette smoldering beneath a bata loafer. All of a sudden, one of the girls, a petite, long-haired beauty, clearly our heroine, turned to look up and caught Baba staring. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of water. My throat is parched. I'm not finished yet. Sorry, my throat was parched. With a disdainful toss of the head, she motioned for the others to follow and ran into the hotel. Within seconds, they had all vanished. Baba looked around and was embarrassed to find that, like himself, the valley's entire male population was perched, poised, or angled sniper style to witness these 6 young women entranced by Swat's natural beauty. The remaining tale is, like most love stories, uninteresting. They met perhaps by accident at one of the shops that lined the one narrow road that led through the tiny village upwards into the mountains, haggling over the same dark shawl or fighting over the last handful of dry fruits. They might have bumped into each other in a shadowy corner of the deeply fragrant forest that lay behind the Pine Cone, Amma busy over a rare plant while Baba admired her bent figure, the graceful curve of her neck exposed by the upsweep of her thick black hair. Who is to say that there might not have been a downpour, the exchange of wet clothing for sheets, and a provocative dance around a fire Bollywood style? Whatever the details, there must have been sulks and quarrels and tender moments too, promises made and broken, then made again beneath a pendulous alpine moon, and eventually the crowning moment, a kiss. The end or the beginning? For me, it was usually the end. The limits of my imagination could go no further into the grown-up world of intimacy that belonged to my parents before I was born. The Swat affair was by far the most romantic of the stories I had invented to explain my existence and that of my brother and sisters, embellished with ever greater detail over the years as my imagination, always outstripping my years, dictated. After all, Baba and Amma meeting, marrying, and moving to America was all to forward one cause, procreation. In other words, us. Jab mein paida hui, or my birth, was a seminal event in my 10-year-old life. That and the death of our mother. Thank you.
I think I'll ask you a couple of questions. I was really interested in the portrayal of the children's dislocation. I think in a way it kind of queried the whole issue of what is home. And that the thing is that Pakistan's their home, but they're constantly taunted for being Amriki. I wondered how this came about and how much of it was actually drawn on your own experience.
I wouldn't say that this story is autobiographical by any means, but the inspiration for it, the premise that these children have lost their mother and move back to Pakistan and reacquaint themselves with their family and with a new set of circumstances, is partly drawn from real life. The other aspect of it that has been drawn from real life is the escape into a fantasy world, which was also something that my sisters and I did when we first moved here.
Well, that's really interesting. Well, your comment on home, what is home?
That is an interesting question, and I think it's becoming a question of urgency for a lot of people now, especially. It's something that's difficult to define, and in this particular story, the children are basically torn away from the only home they know, and they come to Pakistan and everything is alien to them. And they try to piece together their family's history, and in so doing, and in becoming closer to their family, I think that they start thinking of Karachi as their home as well.
Thank you. The portrayal of the children also had a rather unusual child, because it's portrayed through a 10-year-old. The angle at which the descriptions are, emerge is quite interesting, and I was particularly interested in the portrayal of Jamila. In the game, she's this commanding Lady M, so you think she has a figure of authority. And as the plot emerges, it turns out that she is actually a little slow. How did this character emerge? I thought you dealt with it. It's a difficult subject, and I thought you dealt with it very well.
Thank you. It was a difficult subject, and I didn't want it to be apparent at first that one of the children had a disability. I tried to make it so that the reader would not find out till much later. The thing is that these games were transformative for these children. It was the one place where they could feel in control after they'd lost their mother, had been moved into a different situation, a different country. And this is particularly apparent in Jamila. Because of her other disabilities, the games were transformative and gave her that role of leader in their small play acting. So I think that's pretty much it.
Well, you also said that it's not, but in a way politics does permeate all our lives, and you said it's not a political novel, which it was about life, but there were two political events in a sense. One was the increasing religiosity that the children find in Pakistan, and the other one was these sort of little words that would come, Dhaka, and then there would be a silence, or 1971, there was a silence. Can you comment on these two issues and this aspect of family life and politics and family life?
Yes. I don't know why I'm fascinated with 1971 and the separation of East and West Pakistan. It happened a few years before I was born. It didn't directly impact my family in any way. I didn't set out for this story to talk about it. I just let the story flow, and for some reason it wove itself in again, just like my first book. I think what I'm more interested in is not dates, events, and political happenings. If you asked me questions, I probably couldn't even give you a cogent answer. What I'm more interested in is the emotional repercussions of these huge political cataclysmic events, and the effects on the history of families. That is what was my focus.
Well, but your characters actually negotiate difference in various ways. You know, there's Pakistani American, there's religious and not religious, there's Shia, Sunni, Hindu, Muslim, East and West Pakistan. Can you comment on the way you negotiate difference? What does this imply for you, for your characters?
I think my aim was to, not that I want to have a message, it's not what I intended, but I did want to show in the experiences of this one family how all of these complicated issues, their past, their history, ultimately gets resolved because fundamentally they love one another. And it's not simply just ties of blood, because there are relationships in the story that are not blood relationships but transcend what one would commonly think of as blood relationships. And I think that's what I was trying to show. Ultimately, the story is not a tragedy, even though these children lost their mother. I think I would prefer it to be seen as hopeful and that their experience is redeeming.
Well, thank you. Would you like to read one more passage?
I think if we have time, it's a very short one.
Is it a very short one, or would you prefer, should we ask audience questions?
It's up to you.
Are there any questions in the audience? Can we have one or two quick questions, and maybe you can end up with
Sure.
Yeah. Any questions? Oh, there's no. Hello. No. Then any questions? No. Well, then just go ahead with the reading.
This particular passage is when Farzana accompanies her family on a drive through the streets of Karachi. On my very first visit to my Mamu's house, a pale green two-story in the congested heart of an older subdivision of Karachi, famous for its sweet sheer mal, as for the Imam Barga at its center, I was immediately captivated by a massive portrait in black and white on the wall directly opposite the entrance. It depicted an older man with thinning shoulder-length hair, casually sitting on a bench surrounded by trees in a park or a garden. His kurta sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, one pajama leg slung across the other, his sockless feet in Oxfords. He was smiling through his eyes, not his lips, his entire face a study in suppressed merriment. Mischievous, a friend of tricksters and frauds. He looked as if he had just hoodwinked a pair of little boys into trading their chocolate for a bowl of bitter gourd. I decided immediately that I liked him and assumed that ours was a relationship not only of kindred spirits but also of blood. This man must be my Nana, I decided, long before we had been formally introduced. Our trip to this part of the city to visit our mother's side of the family was secretly arranged by Shahbaz Chacha, who had proven himself a consistent ally, notwithstanding a few incidents which I eventually put down to lapses in good judgment and forgave. We set off that Sunday morning on a tour of the old city, which Shahbaz Chacha persuaded Dada was necessary for our full integration into Karachi life, although we had already spent 6 months in the city and had seen a fair part of it. Miraculously, no one objected, and Baba, when told, briefly looked up from his newspaper, it was last week's, to nod his head, wishing us a safe drive but showing no desire to participate. And so there we were, the three of us girls in the back, the windows pulled down and our hair flying, while Shahbaz Chacha and Raza in front yelled over the wind and the amplified traffic sounds, and spoke of the city as it was now, and how it once was when our father's family first moved here. I was intrigued. Like us who had migrated from one large metropolis to another, the Mahmoods had made their own migratory journey, from the northern Indian province of Uttar Pradesh to the southern seaport of Karachi, where they had settled after the partition. Before I could ask, Shahbaz Chacha explained that the partition referred to the division of India and Pakistan in 1947 by the British, who had once ruled over them. Dada, whom I had always imagined as a giant oak, his roots buried deep and wide beneath the foundations of C-44, so fixed and rigid was he in his routine, had grown up in an entirely different place, a village no less, with a population of a few thousand people. For a couple of minutes I mulled over this, paying no attention to Shahbaz Chacha's description of the busy thoroughfare we were slowly making our way down, the heart of the business district, its tall buildings rising above the pollution and touching the blue, cloudless sky. It was no less a surprise to me after countless geography classes and coloring my way through outlined maps that countries, like people, were not stable entities, that they were made and broken, then made again. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one brief question that I wanted to enter. You're working, working on a third novel.
I am.
What's it about? Where is it headed?
It's just the very beginning. The book is actually set in North America this time, and it's the story of a young woman who gets married and moves to America, and then sort of develops a psychosis from watching TV dramas. So, I mean, it's still in the works. I don't know how it's going to pan out, whether it'll even be finished, but it's a topic that really interests me because when you live in the US, I have a lot of friends who are obsessed with Pakistani serials, and I always find it very interesting and funny to hear them talk about these characters as if they are real people. So that's what I have planned. I don't know if it'll work out, but that's what I have planned right now.
Well, that sounds fascinating, and I look forward to it. And thank you so much. And I loved the book.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that 3 very special people were not here today. Irfan Rizvi, my husband, and my 2 older daughters, Dalia and Anya. I just want to thank them too for their continued love and support. And thank you all for your support and for coming out today to hear me read from my book. Thank you.